Welcome to the first Tales by the Campfire, presented by Dark Empty Roads. So pull up a chair, settle in, and enjoy. As the nights grow longer and the leaves turn, a chilling tale resurfaces and whispers around bonfires and cautious conversations. It's the story of a man whose escape from a mental institution over a decade ago marked the beginning of an unsettling chapter in local folklores. Known for hiding in the dark, he doesn't strike in the typical ways of fugitives or criminals. Instead, he waits in silence, under the beds of unsuspecting victims, watching for the perfect moment to strike. What he takes from them leaves a mark, something missing that's never found, a chilling reminder that he's still out there, lurking where you least expect it. Now, let us take a slow walk down the dark, empty roads and find the legend of Jimmy Calhoun. In towns and cities near you, a story circulates every year as the leaves turn orange and the nights grow longer. Parents warn their children, and teenagers whisper it around bonfires, daring each other to test its truth. It's the legend of Jimmy Calhoun, a once normal man whose mind twisted into something dark and unrecognizable. He escaped from a mental institution over a decade ago, and ever since, his name has been synonymous with dread. Jimmy Calhoun was infamous for his peculiar habit. Unlike other escaped convicts or deranged fugitives, he wreaked havoc in typical ways. Jimmy's simplest pleasure was far stranger and more unsettling. They say that once he breaks into a house, he doesn't rob or harm in the ways you might expect. Instead, he hides. He finds his way under the beds of his unsuspecting victims, lying still and silent, waiting for that one fatal mistake. A hand dangling carelessly off the edge of the bed. Jimmy had a particular fixation. He only took one finger, just one, from any hand that dangled. He didn't kill. He didn't mutilate beyond the missing digit. The police never understood why he did it, and that unanswered question made it worse. The sheer randomness of it, the helplessness of the victims, and the grotesque reminder left behind in the form of a missing finger, all contributed to the aura of fear that surrounded the legend of Jimmy Calhoun. The college student. Emma was a junior at Maplewood University, living off campus in a small, creaky apartment. The building was old, its walls thin, and its floors perpetually cold no matter how high she cranked the heat. It was the first time she lived alone, and while she enjoyed the freedom, the silence often felt oppressive. She convinced herself that every noise was just the house settling, every shadow just a trick of the light. It started with small things, a sock gone missing, a slight rearrangement of her books, a strange scent lingering in the air. Emma was a rational person, so she chalked it up to absent-mindedness and the natural quirks of an old building. But then the dreams began, dreams where she felt watched, where a heavy presence loomed over her. She'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, convinced she wasn't alone. One particularly restless night, she woke with a start. Her room was dark, the streetlights outside casting faint patterns on her walls. Emma lay still, her heart hammering. She heard it then, a soft, almost inaudible shuffle coming from beneath the bed. She froze, fear paralyzing her every muscle. It was just her imagination, she told herself, just the house making its usual noises. But the sound continued, slow and deliberate. Terrified, she didn't dare move. She didn't scream, didn't reach for her phone. She simply lay there, rigid and praying for morning. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her, and she drifted into a fitful sleep. When she woke up, the first thing she noticed was the pain, a sharp, burning sensation in her left hand. Emma glanced down and screamed. Pinky finger was gone, severed cleanly at the base, Blood soaked her sheets. The police found no trace of an intruder, no signs of forced entry. Emma moved out the next day, her mind shattered by the ordeal. She never slept with her hands exposed again, and neither did anyone else who heard her story. The Newlyweds. Mark and Sarah had just bought their first home, a charming fixer-upper on the outskirts of town. They were blissfully happy, despite the house's quirks, the occasional creaks, the drafty windows, the odd plumbing noises. It was an old house, and they loved its character. One night, as they lay in bed, Mark was jolted awake by a noise. It was subtle, a gentle scraping sound like fingernails against wood. He nudged Sarah, but she mumbled something about raccoons and went back to sleep. Mark wasn't convinced. He got up, checked the locks, peered out the windows. Nothing. Everything was secure. He went back to bed, trying to ignore the nagging unease. The noise persisted over the next few nights, sometimes louder, sometimes softer, but always there. Sarah began to notice it too, and they joked about the house being haunted, but their jokes masked real concern, and their sleep became fitful, each of them waking up at odd hours, feeling watched. One night, Sarah fell asleep with her hand hanging over the side of the bed. Mark woke up to a piercing scream. He scrambled to turn on the light and found Sarah clutching her hand, blood streaming from where her ring finger used to be. Rushed to the hospital, hysterical and confused. The police searched the house thoroughly. They found scratches on the floorboards under the bed, but no other evidence of an intruder. Mark and Sarah couldn't bring themselves to sleep in the room again. They sold the house and moved far away, but the fear followed them. Every night, they checked their bed meticulously, their hands tucked safely under the blankets. The Teenage Dare. It was a typical Friday night for a group of teenagers looking for a thrill. They gathered around a bonfire in the woods, swapping scary stories and trying to outdo each other. Someone mentioned Jimmy Calhoun, and the group erupted into laughter. They didn't believe in urban legends. They were too old for that. But as the night went on, the dare was inevitable. Hang your hand off the bed and see if Jimmy shows up. Jake, the bravest, or perhaps the most foolish among them, volunteered. They all headed back to his house, where he dramatically draped his hand over the edge of his bed, smirking at his friends. They hung out for a while, teasing each other, until the night grew late. One by one, the group dispersed, leaving Jake alone. He kept his hand dangling as a joke, but as the hours passed, his confidence waned. The room felt colder, the shadows darker. He could hear his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Just as he was about to pull his hand up, exhaustion claimed him. Jake's mother found him the next morning. She screamed at the sight, her son's hand soaked in blood, his index finger missing. He was groggy and disoriented, barely able to process what had happened. The police were baffled. There were no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, except Jake's own. Word spread quickly among the teens in town. None of them dared to sleep with their hands exposed again. The dare that started as a joke ended in fear. Jimmy Calhoun became more than just a story. They believed. To this day, the legend of Jimmy Calhoun lingers in towns and cities everywhere. The details vary. Some say he was wrongfully imprisoned. Others claim he was a sadistic murderer even before the mental institution. But the core of the story remains the same. Jimmy escaped, and he's still out there, waiting under the beds of those who are careless enough to let their hands dangle. Parents warn their children, telling them to keep their hands safely under the covers. Teenagers still dare each other, testing the legend's truth, though few are brave enough to risk a finger. And ever so often, someone wakes up to find their sheets stained with blood and a finger missing. So if you ever feel a chill under your bed or hear a faint rustle in the dark, remember the story of Jimmy Calhoun. He's out there, watching, waiting for his next victim. Whatever you do, keep your hands close by.